On February 8th, 2026, 127 million Americans sat down to watch the Seattle Seahawks beat the New England Patriots 29-13 in Super Bowl 60. But here's the thing most people don't realize. While those fans were watching a football game, they were also participating in the largest single-day gambling event in American history. $1.71 billion wagered through legal sportsbooks alone. $871 million processed through a single prediction market platform called Kalshi, and an estimated 4 to 5 billion more flowing through illegal offshore books, private bookies, and underground channels. We're talking about roughly $7 billion changing hands on a single football game. What's up, Stonks Forum? Today we're going deep, and I mean deep, into one of the most insane economic stories happening right now in America. A story about how a 2018 Supreme Court decision unleashed a $150 billion gambling tsunami that's reshaping sports, destroying young men's finances, creating billion-dollar companies overnight, and turning every single football game into a casino floor. This is the story of how bookmakers hijacked the Super Bowl, and more importantly, how they're bleeding America dry while everyone cheers them on. Let me be very clear about something before we start. This isn't a moral lecture. I'm not going to sit here and tell you gambling is evil. What I am going to do is follow the money, because when you follow the money in the sports betting industry, you find a story that involves Supreme Court justices, Silicon Valley venture capitalists, Wall Street hedge funds, prediction market startups valued at $11 billion, lobbying campaigns that would make big tobacco blush, a mental health crisis among young men that nobody wants to talk about, and a regulatory framework so broken that companies are literally arguing in court over whether betting is actually betting. So grab a coffee. This one's going to take a while. To understand how we got here, we need to go back to May 14, 2018. That's the day the United States Supreme Court handed down its decision in Murphy v. National Collegiate Athletic Association. And that decision changed everything. Here's the backstory. In 1992, Congress passed something called the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act, PASPA for short. It was also known as the Bradley Act, named after New Jersey Senator Bill Bradley, who was, ironically, a former NBA star. The law effectively banned sports betting in 46 states. Only Nevada, Delaware, Montana, and Oregon got exemptions because they already had some form of legal sports betting. Now, there's a fascinating detail here. Congress actually gave New Jersey a one-year window to legalize sports betting. New Jersey had until January 1st, 1993 to pass a law. And they didn't do it, they just didn't act. For 20 years, that missed deadline haunted them. Fast forward to 2011, New Jersey voters approved a constitutional amendment to legalize sports betting. The state legislature passed the Sports Wagering Act in 2012, and immediately, the NCAA, NFL, NBA, NHL, and MLB all sued to block it. This kicked off a legal battle that lasted 6 years. New Jersey lost in district court, lost on appeal. The Supreme Court initially refused to hear it, so New Jersey got creative. Instead of authorizing sports betting, which PASPA prohibited, they tried simply repealing their existing ban. The argument was, we're not telling people they can gamble, we're just no longer telling them they can't. The sports league sued again. Lower courts ruled against New Jersey again, but this time the Supreme Court agreed to take the case. On May 14, 2018, Justice Samuel Alito delivered the court's opinion. It was a 7-2 decision, And the reasoning was devastating for PASPA. The court ruled that PASPA violated the anti-commandeering doctrine of the 10th Amendment. In plain English, the federal government cannot order state governments to maintain specific laws. Congress can regulate individuals directly, or it can leave regulation to the states. What it cannot do is say, states, you must keep this specific law on your books. Justice Alito wrote, and this is a hell of a line, quote, "A more direct affront to state sovereignty is not easy to imagine." PASPA was struck down. All of it. Not just the part about states, but the provisions about private individuals too. The court declared the entire law unconstitutional and inseverable. And just like that, every state in America was free to legalize sports betting. Within weeks, Delaware and New Jersey took the first legal sports bets outside Nevada. And then the floodgates opened. Let me hit you with some numbers that will make your head spin. Before the Murphy decision in 2018, Americans legally wagered less than $5 billion annually on sports. That was basically all Nevada. In 2204, Americans legally wagered over $150 billion on sports. That's a 30-fold increase in 6 years. As of right now, 31 states plus Washington, D.C. have legalized some form of online sports betting that covers just about half of all American adults who can now place a bet from their phone while sitting on the couch watching the game. The U.S. sports betting market generated $17.94 billion in revenue in 2200, and it's projected to grow at nearly 11% annually through 2030. This is the fastest expansion of legalized gambling in American history. The National Council on Problem Gambling calls it, quote, "the largest and fastest explosion of gambling the country has ever seen." And at the center of all of it, standing like a $250 million lighthouse guiding every gambling dollar in America, is the Super Bowl. Super Bowl 60, Seattle Seahawks versus New England Patriots, February 8th, 22-6, Levi Stadium, Santa Clara, California. On paper, it was a mismatch. The Seahawks were 4.5-point favorites. Two defensive-minded teams. Not exactly the star power of last year's Taylor Swift-soaked Chiefs-Eagles rematch. And you could see it in the betting numbers. Nevada sportsbooks reported a handle, that's the total amount wagered, of just $133.8 million on Super Bowl 60. That's the LOS since 2016. It's more than $50 million less than the record set in 22-4 when the Super Bowl was actually in Las Vegas. Now, you might think, wait, the betting market is shrinking? Didn't you just tell us it exploded? And that's where the story gets really interesting. Because what happened to Super Bowl 60 betting reveals the tectonic shift happening underneath the entire industry. See? Nevada is only one state. And it's a weird one for online betting because you still have to register for a sportsbook account in person at a physical casino. You literally have to walk into a casino, show your ID, and set up your account before you can bet on your phone. Nationally, the picture was completely different. Legal Sports Report projected a record $1.71 billion wagered on the game across all legal sportsbooks. That's billion with a B. But even that number doesn't tell the full story, because lurking in the shadows, or rather, right out in the open, with a Super Bowl Sunday App Store ranking of number 2 in the entire United States, was a company that is rewriting the rules of the entire industry. Its name is Kalshi, and on Super Bowl Sunday, it processed $871 million in trading volume in a single day. But we'll get to Kalshi later. First, let's talk about how the sportsbooks actually make their money on the Super Bowl. All right, let's get into the mechanics. Because most people don't understand how sportsbooks actually make money, and that misunderstanding is costing Americans billions. The basic business model is simple. Sportsbooks set odds that include a built-in margin called the VIG or juice. Think of it like a transaction fee. On a standard bet, you might need to risk $110 to win $100. That extra $10 is the VIG. In theory, a sportsbook wants equal money on both sides of a bet. If they have $1 million on the Seahawks and $1 million on the Patriots, they don't care who wins. They collect the VIG from the losers and pay out the winners, pocketing the difference risk-free. But the Super Bowl is different. The Super Bowl is where sportsbooks make their real money, and it's not from the game itself. Here's the key stat. According to Legal Sports Report, more than 25% of all Super Bowl handle was tied to same-game parlays. And Citizens Bank estimated that player prop markets accounted for roughly 50 to 60% of all Super Bowl wagering. Let me explain why this matters. A straight bet on the Seahawks to cover the spread has a VIG of about 4.5%. The sportsbook's edge is small. A 3-leg same-game parlay? The implied VIG can be 20 to 30%, sometimes even higher, because the sportsbook is correlating odds across multiple outcomes, and they're not giving you fair value on those correlations. A player prop, like will Kenneth Walker rush for over 95 yards and the Seahawks win and the total stays under 45, the embedded margin on that bet can be astronomical. This is why the structure of Super Bowl 60 was a dream scenario for sportsbooks. The game went 9-0 at halftime, 12-0 through 3 quarters. Only 4 touchdowns were scored, all in the 4th quarter. The total stayed under. It was a defensive slugfest. And for bettors, that was a catastrophe, because the vast majority of casual Super Bowl bettors hammer the over. They bet on touchdowns, they bet on big performances. They build same-game parlays loaded with yes outcomes and over outcomes. When a game is 12-0 in the 3rd quarter, all of those bets are dying on the vine. Listen to what BetMGM senior trading manager Christian Cipollini said after the game. Only 4 touchdowns being scored was a great result for us. And Circa Sports director Jeff Benson summed it up perfectly. A lot of unders on props. The game staying under was beautiful. We cleaned up. The numbers tell the story. Nevada sportsbooks held 7.4% of the handle. That means they kept 7.4 cents of every dollar wagered. On $133 million in handle, they won $9.9 million. But nationally, the picture was even better for the books. The low-scoring game suppressed same-game parlay survival rates. Here's the beautiful irony from the sportsbook's perspective. The public was all over the Seahawks. Seattle was the most popular side. The Seahawks covered easily, winning by 16 points. So casual fans think they had a great day because their team pick won. But their exotic bets, their parlays, their props, their touchdown scorers, all got crushed by the defensive nature of the game. It's like winning $1 on the slot machine while losing 20 at the blackjack table and walking away thinking you're a winner. And here's where it gets really interesting from a financial perspective. The Super Bowl isn't just a big betting day. It's the sportsbook industry's customer acquisition Super Bowl too. DraftKings, FanDuel, BetMGM, Caesars, they all run massive promotional campaigns around the Super Bowl. Free bet offers, deposit bonuses, enhanced odds. Bet $5, get $200 in bonus bets. You've seen the ads. These promotions are designed to do one thing: get new users through the door. Because the sportsbook industry has learned something crucial from Silicon Valley. It's all about lifetime customer value. It doesn't matter if you lose money on a customer during Super Bowl weekend. If you get them to download the app, create an account, and place their first bet, you've got a customer who will statistically keep betting for months or years. And the data backs this up. DraftKings had 4.8 million active users in 2024, adding over 1 million new users that year alone. FanDuel's parent company Flutter reported a 15% year-over-year increase in sportsbook revenue in the first quarter of 2205, driven by an 8% increase in handle and a 9% increase in monthly players. These companies are growing at 20 to 30% annually. DraftKings generated $4.7 billion in revenue in 2204. FanDuel is projected to generate between $7.5 and $8 billion in 2025. Together, FanDuel and DraftKings control about 66% of the entire U.S. sports betting market. It's a duopoly that makes Google and Apple look like they have competition. Let me say that again. Two companies control 2/3 of a $117 billion handle market. To understand how two companies came to dominate an entire industry, you need to understand a concept I call the fantasy to reality pipeline. Before PASPA was struck down in 2018, both FanDuel and DraftKings were daily fantasy sports companies. You know the drill. Pick your lineup, compete against other players, win cash prizes. It was technically not gambling because it was classified as a game of skill. Both companies spent years and hundreds of millions of dollars building brand recognition, refining their apps, and most importantly, building user databases. FanDuel had over 8 million registered customers by 2018. DraftKings had about the same. When sports betting was legalized, these companies had a massive head start. They already had the brand. They already had the technology. They already had millions of potential customers who were one app update away from becoming sports bettors. And they leveraged that advantage ruthlessly. FanDuel went live in New Jersey in September 2018, just months after the Murphy decision. DraftKings went live in August. By that point, the traditional casino companies, Caesars, MGM, Wynn, were still figuring out their digital strategies. The numbers tell the story of total market domination. FanDuel holds approximately 34 to 40% of national gross gaming revenue market share depending on the month. Their structural hold, that's the percentage of money wagered that they keep, hit 14.5% in the fourth quarter of 2204. That's significantly higher than the industry average. DraftKings holds about 32 to 36% market share, with a hold rate of around 10.5%. Combined, 66 to 77% of the entire market, depending on whether you're looking at handle or revenue. And here's what's really wild. Nobody can catch them. BetMGM sits in a distant third place. ESPN Bet, which was supposed to be a game changer when it launched with Penn Entertainment in late 2000-2003, has been a disappointment. They were targeting 20% market share by 2007. As of mid-2200, they were stuck at around 6%. Fanatics Sportsbook? About 7 to 8% and struggling. The lesson is clear. In digital markets, first mover advantage combined with network effects creates an almost impenetrable moat. FanDuel and DraftKings got there first, and everyone else is fighting for scraps. But here's where the story takes a fascinating turn. Because just when it looked like the DraftKings FanDuel duopoly was completely locked in, A company came along that doesn't play by any of the same rules. A company that says it's not a sportsbook. A company that says it's not gambling. A company that's regulated by the same federal agency that oversees corn futures and oil derivatives. A company that, on Super Bowl Sunday 2200, Six briefly hit the number 2 spot in the entire US App Store, ahead of Instagram, ahead of TikTok, ahead of literally everything except one app. Its name is Kalshi, and it might be the most disruptive and most controversial financial product created in the last decade. Before we get to Kalshi, let me break down how the money actually flows in the traditional sportsbook industry, because the corporate structure is more complex than most people realize, and it reveals who's really profiting. Let's start with FanDuel. FanDuel is owned by Flutter Entertainment, an Irish-British company headquartered in Dublin. Flutter is the largest online gambling company in the world by revenue. They also own Paddy Power, Betfair, PokerStars, and a bunch of other gambling brands across Europe and Australia. They are publicly traded on both the London Stock Exchange and the New York Stock Exchange. When you lose a $20 parlay on FanDuel, that money flows from your bank account through the app into FanDuel's US operations and ultimately to Flutter's global balance sheet. Flutter's total revenue in 2002 was approximately $14 billion. FanDuel's U.S. operation generated about $5.78 billion of that. The profits flow to shareholders, including major institutional investors like the Capital Group, Vanguard, BlackRock, and T. Rowe Price. DraftKings is a publicly traded American company, ticker symbol DKNG, with a market cap that fluctuates around $15 to $20 billion. Its major institutional shareholders include Vanguard, BlackRock, State Street, and various hedge funds. BetMGM is a joint venture between MGM Resorts International and Entain, another British gambling company. Caesars acquired British bookmaker William Hill for $2.9 billion. Do you see the pattern? The American sports betting industry is largely owned by multinational gambling conglomerates and Wall Street institutional investors. The profits from millions of American bettors losing money on their phones flow up through corporate structures to shareholders who, in many cases, have never placed a sports bet in their lives. This is the financialization of gambling. Your lost parlay is someone else's dividend payment. And the economics are getting more interesting and more contentious because of taxation. New York imposes a 51% tax rate on sportsbook operator revenue. That's the highest in the nation by far. Illinois has been raising taxes aggressively, imposing a new per-wager tax in addition to its revenue tax that sparked a standoff with operators. Arizona's governor proposed a 45% tax rate for the largest operators. The sportsbooks are fighting these tax increases tooth and nail. DraftKings CEO Jason Robins tried to pass Illinois' tax increase directly to bettors through a surcharge on winning bets, essentially making customers pay the company's taxes. FanDuel's parent company Flutter publicly refused to follow suit, forcing DraftKings to back down. But make no mistake, the costs are being passed to consumers one way or another, whether through wider spreads, higher VID, worse promotional offers, or direct fees. FanDuel did impose a 50-cent transaction fee on all wagers in Illinois. The tax revenue is real, though. New York alone generated over $1 billion in sports betting tax revenue in 2005. Across all states, the gambling tax haul is in the multiple billions. State governments are becoming dependent on this revenue stream, which creates a perverse incentive. The more people gamble and lose, the more tax revenue the state collects. It's the same dynamic that plagued state lotteries for decades. The government is simultaneously supposed to protect citizens from gambling harm and benefit financially from their gambling losses. Those two objectives are fundamentally incompatible. And yet, every year, more states legalize. Missouri became the latest in December 2005. Only a handful of major states, California, Texas, are still holdouts. And even in those states, Kalshi is already accessible through the federal regulation loophole. Kalshi was founded in 2018 by two MIT students, Tarek Mansour and Luana Lopez Lara. Both were former hedge fund traders. Their pitch was simple but radical. Create a stock exchange for real-world events. Instead of buying shares of Apple or Tesla, you could buy contracts on future outcomes. Will it rain in New York tomorrow? Will the Federal Reserve raise interest rates? Will the GDP come in above or below expectations? Each contract is priced between 1 cent and 99 cents. The price represents the market's perceived probability of the event happening. If you think an event is more likely than the market suggests, you buy yes contracts. If you think it's less likely, you buy no contracts. If you're right, each contract pays out $1. If you're wrong, you lose what you paid. Now, here's the crucial distinction that Kalshi hangs its entire business on. They say this is not gambling. They say it's trading. They say Kalshi is a financial exchange regulated by the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, the CFTC, the same federal agency that oversees derivatives markets, commodity futures, and options trading. And technically, they're right. In 2200, Kalshi became the first CFTC-regulated prediction market exchange in the United States. The CFTC approved their application to list event contracts, binary contracts tied to future events. For the first few years, Kalshi offered mostly financial and economic contracts. Will inflation hit a certain level? Will a recession start? Pretty boring stuff in the grand scheme of things. The platform did about $183 million in trading volume in 2023 and generated roughly $1.8 million in revenue. Then two things happened that changed everything. First, in September 2204, a federal judge in Washington, D.C., sided with Kalshi in a landmark case against the CFTC, which had tried to ban Kalshi from offering election-related contracts. The court ruled that the CFTC had overstepped its authority. Second, Donald Trump won the presidency. The new administration brought in a new CFTC chairman, Mike Selig, who publicly stated his intention to support the responsible development of prediction markets. The regulatory headwinds that had been holding Kalshi back suddenly became tailwinds. Kalshi didn't just walk through the door, it kicked it down and threw a house party. In early 2205, Kalshi started offering contracts on the Super Bowl. Just an experiment at first. The CFTC didn't step in to stop them, so Kalshi went all in on sports. Football, basketball, March Madness. And the growth numbers are absolutely insane. Revenue, $1.8 million in 2230, $24 million in 2230. That's a 1,200% increase. An estimated $260 million in 2230. Trading volume, $183 million in 22.3, $1.97 billion in 2230. Over $50 billion in annualized volume by mid-2230. Valuation, $5 billion after a $300 million Series D in October 2025. Then $11 billion after a $1 billion Series E Just 6 weeks later, investors include Sequoia Capital, Andreessen Horowitz, Paradigm, Capital G, which is Google's investment arm, ARK Invest, and Y Combinator. Sports now account for more than 90% of all trading activity on Kalshi. Football alone drives roughly 90% of trading volumes during the NFL season. Let me put this in perspective. This is a company that went from generating less than $2 million in revenue to potentially generating over $250 million in revenue in 2 years. Its valuation went from essentially nothing to $11 billion. Its app briefly surpassed Instagram on the App Store during Super Bowl Sunday. And they're telling regulators it's not gambling. Now look, I want to be fair here. Kalshi does operate differently from a traditional sportsbook. Here's the key structural difference. At DraftKings or FanDuel, you're betting against the house. The sportsbook sets the odds, takes the other side of your bet, and profits when you lose. It's a casino model. At Kalshi, you're trading against other users. Kalshi is a marketplace that matches buyers and sellers. If you want to bet yes on the Seahawks winning, someone else has to take the no side. Kalshi just facilitates the transaction and takes a fee. It's an exchange model, structurally more similar to the New York Stock Exchange than to a Las Vegas sportsbook. Kalshi also points out that its contracts are CFTC regulated, which means they're subject to federal oversight, including Know Your Customer checks, anti-money laundering compliance, and mandatory daily trade reporting. But here's the thing that state regulators absolutely cannot stand. Because Kalshi is federally regulated by the CFTC, it claims that state gambling laws don't apply to it. This is massive, because it means Kalshi can offer sports contracts in states where DraftKings and FanDuel aren't allowed to operate, including California, the largest state in the country, where voters explicitly rejected legalizing sports betting in 2002. Think about that for a second. California voters said no to sports betting. And then Kalshi showed up and said, cool story, but we're not sports betting, we're financial trading, and started offering contracts on the Super Bowl to California residents while the game was literally being played in California. And that brings us to the war, because state regulators, tribal gaming interests, and traditional sports books are not going quietly into the night. Massachusetts and Nevada have filed lawsuits against Kalshi. 9 other states have sent cease and desist letters. 3 Native American tribes in California are suing Kalshi for violating federal gaming laws on tribal lands. New York Attorney General Letitia James issued a consumer warning before Super Bowl 60, calling prediction markets unregulated gambling without basic protections. Polymarket, Kalshi's main competitor, which is crypto-based and technically offshore, sued Massachusetts in federal court after the state forced Kalshi to geoblock its residents. Polymarket argues federal law preempts state gambling regulations, and this legal battle is almost certainly headed to the Supreme Court. The fundamental question, when is a bet not a bet? Can you rebrand gambling as trading by changing the mechanics from a sportsbook model to an exchange model? And does federal commodities regulation preempt state gambling laws? The irony is incredible. The Murphy decision in 2018 opened the door to state-by-state sports betting legalization. 7 years later, Kalshi is using federal regulation to go around those same state laws. The states fought for the right to regulate gambling themselves. Now a startup is saying, actually, this isn't gambling, and the feds regulate us, so your state laws don't apply. And the numbers show that Kalshi is already eating into traditional sportsbooks' market share. According to Citizens Bank analyst Jordan Bender, Prediction markets now capture approximately 5% of legal sports betting handle, roughly $8 billion annually. During Super Bowl weekend, DraftKings and FanDuel stocks were under pressure, partly because prediction markets like Kalshi were stealing their volume. According to Fortune, around 10% of DraftKings users were also using Kalshi in January 2022. And Kalshi's app was downloaded 4 times as much as either FanDuel or DraftKings. DraftKings and FanDuel have responded by launching their own prediction market apps, but together, they got just under 100,000 downloads in January, compared to Kalshi's 1.9 million downloads. The incumbent giants are losing the distribution war, and they know it. And now we come to one of the most absurd, hilarious, and genuinely revealing moments in the entire prediction market saga. Let me tell you about the Cardi B halftime show controversy. Before Super Bowl 60's halftime show, which featured Bad Bunny, both Kalshi and Polymarket offered markets on which surprise guests would appear during the performance. One of the most popular markets, will Cardi B perform at the Super Bowl halftime show? More than $4.4 million was traded on this one market on Kalshi, $10 million on Polymarket. People were genuinely putting thousands of dollars on whether or not a specific rapper would sing at halftime. So what happened? Cardi B did appear during Bad Bunny's set. She was in La Casita, a stage prop, alongside Pedro Pascal, Karol G, and Jessica Alba. She danced, she vibed, she was clearly visible on screen, but she never picked up a microphone, she never sang. So, did she perform? Kalshi and Polymarket reached opposite conclusions on the same event. Polymarket said yes, Cardi B appeared during the halftime show, that counts as performing. They paid out the yes bets. Kalshi said they weren't sure. They froze the market and invoked a discretionary rule, Rule 6.3 sub C, to settle the market at the last traded price before trading was paused, giving partial payouts to both sides. Think about that. Millions of dollars were wagered on a market that didn't even have a clear definition of what performing means. And when the ambiguous event happened, 2 major platforms reached completely opposite conclusions. At least one trader filed a formal complaint with the CFTC, alleging that Kalshi violated the Commodity Exchange Act through unfair and deceptive conduct. The complaint argued that Kalshi failed to provide clear, objective criteria for what constitutes a performance, and then used a discretionary settlement mechanism that deprived traders of their rightful winnings. The Cardi B incident is funny on the surface, but it actually exposes a fundamental problem with prediction markets. When contract language is ambiguous, there's no referee. Traditional sportsbooks have decades of established rules for settling bets. They have clear definitions of what counts as a reception, a touchdown, a performance. Prediction markets are making up the rules as they go. And this isn't the first time. Earlier in 2026, Kalshi users who held correct positions on certain NFL bets were only repaid their original stake rather than their full winnings. The platform only paid out the actual winnings after backlash from users and gambling industry analyst Dustin Gauker. The deeper issue here is what financial regulators call settlement risk. In traditional finance, the rules for settling trades are crystal clear and enforced by decades of case law and regulatory precedent. In prediction markets, a company can invoke a discretionary rule and decide the outcome of millions of dollars in trades based on whether a rapper dancing counts as performing. Welcome to the future of American gambling. It's wild out here. Let's zoom out and look at the full picture of how money flows through the Super Bowl betting ecosystem, because there are layers here that most people never think about. Layer 1, the handle. The handle is the total amount wagered. For Super Bowl 60, Legal Sports Report projected a record $1.71 billion through traditional legal sportsbooks nationwide. Kalshi processed over $1 billion in Super Bowl-related trading volume. Add in other prediction markets like Polymarket and Prize Picks, and you're looking at roughly $3 billion in legal tracked wagering. But that's not all. The American Gaming Association has historically estimated that illegal sports betting, offshore books, local bookies, underground operations represents a market that's at least as large as the legal market, possibly larger. Some estimates put illegal Super Bowl wagering at $3 to $5 billion additional. So the total Super Bowl betting ecosystem? Potentially $6 to $8 billion on one game. Layer 2, the hold. The hold is the percentage of handle that the sportsbooks keep. Nevada's hold on Super Bowl 60 was 7.4%. Nationally, hold rates have been climbing as sportsbooks get better at managing risk, and as bettors increasingly gravitate toward higher margin products like parlays and props. The industry-wide hold rate in 2025 is averaging over 9% nationally, up from around 7% just a few years ago. Why? Because sportsbooks have figured out that Americans love same-game parlays, and same-game parlays are enormously profitable for the house. Here's a stat that should scare every sports bettor watching this. According to industry data, the hold rate on same-game parlays can exceed 20%. That means for every $100 you wager on a parlay, the sportsbook is expected to keep $20. Over time, you cannot beat that. It is mathematically impossible. Layer 3, the props. Super Bowl prop bets are where sportsbooks print money. Will the coin toss be heads or tails? What color will the Gatorade shower be? How long will the national anthem take? Will there be a safety? Citizens Bank estimated that player prop markets accounted for 50 to 60% of Super Bowl wagering. And the hold rates on exotic props are astronomical. For Super Bowl 60 specifically, the low-scoring nature of the game was a goldmine for sportsbooks. Here's the sequence of events from a betting perspective. The Seahawks led 9-0 at halftime. No touchdowns. 5 field goals total before the fourth quarter. Same-game parlays that included any touchdown scorer were basically dead by the third quarter. Touchdown props on popular players like Jackson Smith-Njigba, Cooper Kupp, and Sam Darnold, the 3 most popular bets at multiple sportsbooks, all lost because those players didn't find the end zone. Kenneth Walker III rushed for 135 yards and won the MVP. But here's the kicker. Literally, he didn't score a touchdown. He had a 49-yard touchdown run called back by a holding penalty. That's the kind of play that keeps sportsbook executives sleeping soundly at night. If that penalty hadn't been called, Walker would have finished with 184 yards and a touchdown, triggering a cascade of parlay and prop payouts that would have cost sportsbooks tens of millions of dollars. One flag, one holding call, the difference between a great day and a devastating day for the entire sportsbook industry. But Walker did win MVP, and his odds were fascinating. When BetMGM first posted Super Bowl MVP odds after the conference championships, Walker was a 52-1 long shot. By kickoff, his number had shortened to 7-1. But even at 7-1, he was only the 4th most bet MVP candidate at BetMGM. Sam Darnold accounted for 21.6% of handle. Drake May, the Patriots quarterback, had 19.7%. Walker, just 6.7%. So the actual MVP was one of the least bet candidates. Again, beautiful for the books. Layer 4, the futures. Here's something most casual fans don't realize. A huge portion of Super Bowl betting happens before the Super Bowl. Futures bets, wagers placed during the regular season or playoffs on which team will win the championship, are included in the Super Bowl handle. Some bettors placed money on the Seahawks at 50-1 or longer before the season even started. Those payouts can be massive for individual bettors, but are generally well managed by sportsbooks because they've had the money in hand for months and have been able to adjust their liability throughout the season. The biggest individual bet story from Super Bowl 60 involved Circa Sports, which took a $1.1 million bet on the Patriots money line at plus 188 the day after odds were posted. Then, literally minutes before kickoff, another bettor dropped a $1 million bomb on the Patriots money line at plus 200. That's $2.1 million in Patriots money line bets at one sportsbook. If the Patriots had won, Circa would have owed over $5 million on those two bets alone. When the Seahawks won 29-13, Jeff Benson, Circa's director of sportsbook operations, told reporters it was a helluva day. Meanwhile, Houston furniture store owner Jim Mattress Mac McIngvale, who is famous for making enormous sports bets as hedges for promotional furniture deals, lost a $2 million bet at Caesars Sportsbook on the AFC to win Super Bowl 60. Mattress Mac is a fascinating character. He runs promotions where customers get their furniture for free if a certain team wins the championship. Then he places massive bets on that team to offset the promotional liability. It's essentially an insurance policy disguised as a publicity stunt. When he wins, he's a folk hero. When he loses, he's still a marketing genius because the media coverage of his bet is worth far more than the $2 million he risked. All right. We need to talk about the elephant in the room, and this is the part of the video where I need you to really listen, because what I'm about to tell you is, in my opinion, the most important part of this entire story. The American sports betting industry is creating a public health crisis, and the primary victims are young men. I know. Here comes the moral lecture, but remember what I said at the beginning? I'm following the money. And when you follow the money in sports betting, it leads directly to millions of young Americans who are losing far more than they can afford. Let me hit you with the data. 22% of all Americans and 48% of men aged 18 to 49 now have at least one mobile sportsbook account. That's nearly half of all young and middle-aged men in the country. According to the Gambling Harm Research Institute, approximately 8.7% of regular sports bettors now meet the clinical criteria for gambling disorder. That translates to roughly 4.2 million Americans currently experiencing severe negative consequences from their betting habits. Among young men aged 18 to 34, the prevalence of problem gambling is 13.4%. That's more than 1 in 8. In states with access to online gambling, bankruptcy rates rose 28%, and debt collection amounts rose 8% roughly 2 years after legalization. That's from a peer-reviewed academic study. Another study found that every dollar spent on sports betting shaved 99 cents off investments, meaning bettors are pulling from savings, not from fun money. They're not using discretionary entertainment budgets. They're raiding their investment accounts. A third study tracked a 20% jump in mass market alcohol consumption and a 75% spike in calls to gambling helplines after legalization. 1 in 5 people with a gambling disorder attempt or complete suicide. That's a higher risk than with any other substance use disorder, according to Johns Hopkins Bloomberg Public Health magazine. And the betting companies know exactly what they're doing. A former FanDuel employee was quoted saying, "Anybody under 25 they have their eye on. Those are the guys that bring you all the money." These companies use sophisticated behavioral targeting to identify when users are at their weakest. They shower vulnerable users with bonuses and promotions at precisely the moments when the algorithms detect they're most likely to make another deposit. They've learned from Silicon Valley, combining addiction science with smartphone technology to create products more captivating than Nevada casinos ever dreamed. 90% of bets are now placed on phones, not at casinos or racetracks. More than half are live bets, placed while games are in progress. Open any betting app and you'll find hundreds of options per game. You don't need to drive anywhere. You don't need to get cash from an ATM. You don't even need to get out of bed. Let me tell you about a guy named Brian Beal. He's a 28-year-old pharmacist in Pennsylvania. His story was featured in Johns Hopkins' Public Health magazine. Brian described waking up in the middle of the night to bet on ping pong matches in Japan. During family parties, he'd sneak to the bathroom to place bets on Korean basketball games. He said there were days when he placed 500 bets. Nobody knew. His gambling buried him in $50,000 of debt, eroded his sleep, caused depression, and at times, suicidal thoughts. He's not an anomaly, he's a statistic. One of 4.2 million Americans with a gambling disorder. And here's what makes this particularly insidious. 90% of online sports bettors aged 18 to 30 for Inc. They can make money from sports betting, not hope to get lucky. They genuinely believe they have a profitable edge. That number has been rising. In 2002, it was 80%. In 2005, it rose to 86%. Among the youngest bettors, 90%. This is mass delusion, enabled and encouraged by an industry that knows the math is stacked against these users. The hold rate, the percentage the house keeps, averages over 9% nationally. On Parlays, it's 20% or more. Over any reasonable time horizon, the vast majority of bettors will lose money. The math is as certain as gravity. But 25-year-old guys scrolling through DraftKings at 2 in the morning think they've figured out a system. They think their 3-leg parlay has a positive expected value. They don't understand conditional probability, vig erosion, or correlated outcomes. And the industry isn't just passively benefiting from this ignorance. They're actively cultivating it. Kalshi, the prediction market darling valued at $11 billion, was caught in 2025 trying to recruit student ambassadors to promote its platform on college campuses. The program would have had college kids pushing what is functionally a sports betting app to their classmates. After backlash, Kalshi took down the social media posts and webpage. But the fact that they tried tells you everything about who their target demographic is. The NCAA's president, Charlie Baker, has called on state gambling commissions to eliminate prop betting on college sports. He's pointed to a wave of scandals where college athletes, kids, essentially, have been caught up in gambling-related investigations. Michael Lewis, the author of The Big Short and Moneyball, spoke at a panel before Super Bowl 60 and said this about sports gambling, quote, "It's especially predatory toward young men. It's young men who do it. And overwhelmingly, it's a young male marketplace." He went further. Even the sports leagues now are privately admitting that sports gambling is the work of the devil. It's now the chief engine of growth. It's corrupting sports. It is creating horrible incentives. And here's the Pew Research data that I think is the most telling stat of all. In 2,282, 22% of men under 30 said legal sports betting is a bad thing for society. Just 3 years later, in 22,000, 47% of men under 30 say it's bad for society. That's more than double the people who were supposed to be the target market. Young men are rapidly turning against the product. They're seeing the damage in their friend groups, in their bank accounts, in their mental health. The industry doesn't care, because even as public opinion shifts, the money keeps flowing. The apps keep getting downloaded, the parlays keep getting placed. Ohio's Governor Mike DeWine, a Republican for what it's worth, called legalizing sports betting in his state his biggest mistake in office. Let that sink in. A sitting governor says his biggest mistake was allowing sports betting, and yet the industry continues to expand. Before we move on, I want to go deeper into the psychology because this is where the business model meets neuroscience, and it's genuinely terrifying when you understand it. Dr. Timothy Fong, a UCLA psychiatry professor board certified in addiction psychiatry, has explained that young people are particularly vulnerable to sports betting because their prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for rational decision-making, impulse control, and risk assessment, isn't fully developed until around age 26. Think about what that means. The minimum age for sports betting in most states is 21. The minimum age on Kalshi is 18. So we're letting people whose brains are literally not finished developing access platforms specifically designed to exploit impulsive decision-making. The dopamine system is at the heart of this. Every time you place a bet, your brain releases dopamine, the feel-good neurotransmitter. But here's the key insight from neuroscience. It's not the win that triggers the biggest dopamine hit. It's the anticipation. The moment between placing the bet and finding out the result. Sportsbooks understand this perfectly. That's why they've engineered their products around micro-betting and live betting. Instead of placing one bet before the game and waiting 3 hours for the result, you can now bet on every single play. Will the next pitch be a ball or a strike? Will the next drive result in a first down? Will the next possession end in a score? Each micro bet creates a new dopamine cycle. Anticipation, result, anticipation, result. Over and over, hundreds of times per game. It's the same feedback loop that makes slot machines addictive, but delivered through your phone on a game you're already watching, with real sports knowledge that makes you feel like you have an edge. And the apps are designed to maximize this cycle. Push notifications when your bet is close to hitting. Real-time odds updates that create urgency. The line is moving. Bet now before the value disappears. Cash-out offers that give you the illusion of control. Take 50% of your potential winnings now or risk it all. These features aren't accidents. They're the product of millions of dollars in user experience research, /B testing, and behavioral psychology. The same techniques that make social media apps addictive. Variable reward schedules, social proof, FOMO triggers, loss aversion manipulation are baked into every sportsbook app. Let me give you a specific example of how insidious this gets. Same-game parlays. Same-game parlays, or SGPN, are the crack cocaine of sports betting. They combine multiple bets from the same game into a single wager. You might bet that the Seahawks win, Kenneth Walker rushes for over 95 yards, the total stays under 45, and Sam Darnold throws for under 200 yards. Each individual bet might have reasonable odds, but when you multiply them together, you get a potential payout of 10 to 1, 20 to 1, or even higher. The allure is obvious. Small bet, huge potential payout. It feels like a lottery ticket, but it looks like informed sports analysis. But the math is devastating. The sportsbook embeds enormous margins into the correlated odds of SGPN. If you calculated the fair odds of your parlay, the true probability of all those events happening, and compared it to the odds the sportsbook offers, you'd find that the sportsbook is keeping 20 to 30% or more of every dollar wagered. Over time, a bettor who focuses on same-game parlays will lose money roughly twice as fast as a bettor who sticks to simple moneyline bets. And yet, SGPN now represent over 25% of all Super Bowl wagering and are the fastest-growing product category at every major sportsbook. DraftKings and FanDuel have been in an arms race to offer more SGP options, more legs per parlay, more exotic combinations. They promote them aggressively. Boost your parlay, because these products are enormously profitable. According to Legal Sports Report, the hold rate on SGPN can be double or even triple the hold rate on standard bets. One analysis estimated that the average SGP bettor loses money 30 to 40% faster than the average straight bettor. And here's the really dark part. The people most likely to bet SGPN are young men, the demographic that's already most vulnerable to gambling addiction, the demographic with the highest prevalence of problem gambling behaviors, the demographic whose brains are literally not fully developed yet. It's a perfect storm. A vulnerable population plus an addictive product design plus aggressive marketing plus frictionless access equals a public health crisis. The Lancet, one of the most prestigious medical journals in the world, published a comprehensive commission review in 2204, noting that a substantial proportion of harm is suffered by those individuals who fall below the threshold for gambling disorders. In other words, you don't have to be a clinical gambling addict to be harmed by sports betting. The casual bettors are getting hurt too, just not badly enough to get diagnosed. I want to be clear about something. I'm not anti-gambling in principle. Adults should have the freedom to spend their money how they choose. But there's a difference between freedom and exploitation. There's a difference between offering a product and engineering addiction. When former FanDuel employees say the company targets anyone under 25 because those are the guys that bring you all the money, that's not just offering a product, that's targeting the vulnerable. When Kalshi tries to recruit college students as ambassadors to push prediction markets on their campuses, that's not democratizing finance, that's predatory marketing. When sportsbooks use AI to identify the exact moment a user is most likely to make an impulsive bet and send them a push notification with a bonus offer at that precise moment, that's not customer service, that's behavioral manipulation. The gambling industry in America generates over $10 billion a year in gross gaming revenue from sports betting alone. It can afford to invest in responsible gambling measures, fund treatment programs at scale, and stop targeting vulnerable populations. It chooses not to because doing so would slow growth, and growth is what Wall Street demands. The National Council on Problem Gambling has been advocating for a share of the sports betting excise tax to be reinvested in state-level gambling addiction services. In most states, the funding for problem gambling treatment is laughably inadequate compared to the scale of the problem. As the NCPG president put it, all who profit from gambling, including the government, have an ethical imperative to use some of that money to mitigate gambling's harms. While many states have followed our advice, oftentimes that funding is directed to other addictions, leaving gambling addiction as an afterthought. An afterthought. in a $150 billion industry. Think about that. And because this video wouldn't be complete without covering the criminal angle, let's talk about Super Bowl betting scams. Every year, the Super Bowl attracts a wave of fraud that costs consumers millions. And the explosion of legal sports betting has, paradoxically, made the scam landscape worse, not better. Here's why. The proliferation of legitimate sportsbook apps has created consumer confusion. There are dozens of legal sportsbooks, each with different apps, different branding, different promotional offers. Most casual bettors can't tell the difference between a legitimate app and a sophisticated fake. Before Super Bowl 60, cybersecurity firms identified fake gambling websites using AI to duplicate the look and feel of legitimate platforms like FanDuel and DraftKings. These sites look identical. Same logos, same color schemes, same layout. They even mimic the same promotional offers. Bet $5, get $200 in bonus bets. But when you deposit money, it doesn't go to DraftKings. It goes to a criminal operation, often based overseas, and it's gone forever. Counterfeit ticket scams are another perennial problem. Super Bowl tickets for the 2026 game ranged from roughly $3,600 for nosebleed seats to over $50,000 for premium field-level positions. At those prices, the incentive for counterfeiters is enormous. And then there are the more sophisticated schemes. Insider trading on prediction markets, for example. A Polymarket user reportedly made $400,000 by correctly predicting that the U.S. military would capture Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. The timing suggested access to non-public government intelligence. Kalshi has responded by appointing a head of enforcement and building surveillance systems to detect suspicious trading patterns. They claim to have run over 200 investigations and frozen relevant accounts in the past year. But the challenge is fundamental. How do you prevent insider trading on an exchange that offers markets on literally everything? When Cardi B was announced as a guest at the halftime show, someone who knew that information before the public could have traded on it and made a guaranteed profit. The prediction market structure makes this kind of information asymmetry extremely valuable and extremely difficult to police. Federal lawmakers have already introduced a bill aimed at restricting trading by government insiders after the Maduro incident. But sports-related insider trading presents a different risk. Anyone with advanced knowledge of a player injury, a coaching decision, or a lineup change could potentially profit on prediction markets. The traditional sportsbook industry has decades of experience managing these risks. Prediction markets are still building this infrastructure from scratch while processing billions in volume. It's a ticking time bomb. The question isn't whether a major prediction market scandal will happen, it's when. All right, let's talk about something that makes the gambling crisis even worse. Taxes. Because the tax treatment of gambling winnings in America is genuinely insane, and a new law has made it even worse. Here's the basic rule. All gambling winnings are taxable income. If you win a $1,000 bet, you owe federal income tax on that $1,000, regardless of how much you lost on other bets. Now, you can deduct gambling losses, but only up to the amount of your winnings, and only if you itemize your deductions. Most Americans take the standard deduction, which means they can't deduct gambling losses at all. But it gets worse. Under the 2025 tax law signed by the Trump administration, there's a new provision that limits gambling loss deductions to 90% of winnings for taxpayers who do itemized. Let me show you what this means with a simple example. Let's say you bet a total of $20,000 during the NFL season. You win some, you lose some. Your total payouts are $21,000. So your net profit is $1,000. Under the old rules, you would report $21,000 in winnings and deduct $20,000 in losses, paying tax on the net $1,000. Fair enough. Under the new rules, you can only deduct 90% of your winnings, $18,900. So you're paying tax on 20. 1,000 minus 18,900. That's $2,100, even though your actual profit was only $1,000. And here's the truly nightmarish scenario. What if you're actually a net loser? What if you bet $25,000 and won back $21,000, meaning you lost $4,000? Under the old rules, you deduct your full $21,000 in losses against your $21,000 in winnings and owe zero tax. Under the new rules, you could only deduct 90%, $18,900. So you owe tax on $2,100 of income, even though you actually lost $4,000. This is what tax experts call phantom income. You owe the IRS money on income that doesn't exist. You lost money gambling, and now you owe the government tax on those losses. This disproportionately affects the people who can least afford it, the casual bettors who are already losing money. The professional gamblers and the whales have accountants and tax lawyers. The 23-year-old kid who lost $5,000 on Parlays during the NFL season and has no idea he owes taxes on winnings he never actually kept? He's about to get a very unpleasant surprise during tax season. And the states are piling on too. New York, for example, imposes a 51% tax rate on sportsbook operator revenue. That's the highest in the nation. Operators have responded by passing costs to consumers. FanDuel imposed a 50-cent transaction fee on all wagers in Illinois after the state passed an additional per-wager tax. DraftKings tried to pass tax increases directly to bettors through surcharges on winning bets, though they backed down after massive public backlash. Think about the full picture here. You're a young guy. You put $5,000 into DraftKings over the course of the NFL season. You lose $1,000 net. You get a tax bill for several $100s on phantom income. Meanwhile, DraftKings generated $4.7 billion in revenue and is growing at 30% a year. The house wins. The government wins. You lose. And you lose twice. Once on the bets and once on the taxes. Welcome to the economics of modern American sports betting. While billions flow through sportsbooks and prediction markets, there's another economic story playing out at the Super Bowl. The one about the host city. And like most things about the Super Bowl economy, it's not what it seems. Every time a city hosts the Super Bowl, you hear massive economic impact numbers. Super Bowl 59 in New Orleans in 2205, the official report claimed $1.25 billion in total economic output, 9,787 jobs created, and $658 million in combined visitor and vendor spending. For Super Bowl 60 in the Bay Area, the estimates ranged from $370 million to $630 million in economic output. These are the numbers that NFL executives use when they wave the Super Bowl hosting rights like a carrot in front of city councils. Build us a new stadium and we'll give you a Super Bowl. Think of the economic impact. But economists have been calling BS on these numbers for years. NC State professor Mike Edwards, whose research focuses on the economic and social legacies of mega sporting events, puts it bluntly: the net direct income to local residents, the actual money that local people receive after costs and outside profits are subtracted, is far smaller than headline figures, often closer to the low hundreds of millions or less. There's a concept called tourist displacement. Super Bowl visitors don't ADD to normal tourism. They replicate. Hotels that would have been filled anyway by regular business travelers and tourists are simply filled by Super Bowl visitors instead. The net increase is much smaller than the gross numbers suggest. And the costs? When Atlanta hosted the Super Bowl in 2019, the city spent an estimated $46 million on hosting. Glendale, Arizona LOS'd money hosting the Super Bowl in 2015, somewhere between $579,000 and $1.2 million. And then there's the stadium question. Las Vegas built Allegiant Stadium for the Raiders at a cost of $1.9 billion. Nearly $750 million came from hotel taxes. The rest? Taxpayers. Edwards told Al Jazeera, the NFL often uses the Super Bowl as a carrot to encourage cities to invest taxpayer money in new stadiums. You're seeing that dynamic play out in places like Chicago and Cleveland, where officials are considering dome stadiums. It's a hustle. The NFL, a league that generates billions in annual revenue, gets cities to build multi-billion-dollar stadiums using public money, then uses the promise of a Super Bowl hosting opportunity as the incentive. The economic impact studies are funded by the host committees themselves and consistently use inflated multipliers and overcount benefits while ignoring costs. Professor Edwards summed it up. I don't think there's any question that the NFL is the Super Bowl's biggest winner when it comes to who's making the most money from the event. It's a commercial success for them. Not for the host city, not for the taxpayers, for the NFL. No discussion of the Super Bowl economy is complete without talking about the ads, and the advertising market for Super Bowl 60 reveals some fascinating economic trends. A 30-second Super Bowl ad slot costs between $8 and $10 million in 2026. Some placements reportedly sold for over $10 million. To put that in perspective, the first Super Bowl in 1967 charged about $42,000 for a 30-second spot. Adjusted for inflation, that's roughly $400,000. So the real price of a Super Bowl ad has increased 20 to 25 times faster than inflation over 60 years. And here's the thing. A quarter of all Super Bowl 60 ads were AI-related. OpenAI ran a ChatGPT ad. Google promoted Gemini. Anthropic, the company behind Claude, made their debut. Meta was there too. Anthropic actually trolled OpenAI in their ad by referencing the fact that OpenAI had started showing ads inside ChatGPT. It was a Silicon Valley passive-aggressive masterclass. But do these ads actually work? The data is mixed. In 2205, according to YouGov, only 24 out of more than 60 brands achieved a significant impact on brand awareness and purchase consideration. Kantar identified just 12 out of 67 ads as top performers. When you're paying $8 to $10 million for 30 seconds, and only about 1 in 5 ads actually moves the needle, the economics are brutal. An Acid Day professor put it this way: for major brands with mass-market products, the Super Bowl remains the best advertising showcase in the world, but only if executed with a creative strategy well aligned with the audience. The advertising landscape also reflects broader economic trends. Automaker representation collapsed from about 40% of Super Bowl ad time in 2012 to just 7% in 2025. Why? Tariff uncertainty, the EV transition, and a general pullback in marketing spend by traditional manufacturers. Meanwhile, tech companies are pouring in. It's a pretty clear indicator of where the economy is heading, from manufacturing to software, from physical products to digital services. And of course, sportsbook advertising during the Super Bowl is its own fascinating meta-story. The NFL actually banned prediction market ads from the Super Bowl broadcast. Think about that. The league is totally fine with DraftKings and FanDuel saturating every commercial break and sponsoring half the on-screen graphics. But prediction markets? That's too far. The reason is obvious. The NFL has direct partnership deals with DraftKings, FanDuel, and Caesars. Those deals are worth hundreds of millions. Prediction markets like Kalshi are threatening those partners. So the NFL is using its broadcasting monopoly to protect its existing revenue streams. Beyond betting and advertising, the Super Bowl generates an absolutely staggering amount of consumer spending. And I mean staggering. Total nationwide Super Bowl spending in 22-6 exceeded $18 billion. That includes food, drinks, decorations, new TVs, apparel, parties, everything. Americans consumed approximately 1.4 billion chicken wings during Super Bowl weekend. 1.4 billion? If you lined those wings up end to end, they'd stretch. Actually, I don't know how far, but it's a lot of wings. The Super Bowl accounts for roughly 5% of annual U.S. beer sales. 5% of an entire year's beer consumption happens during one weekend. The halftime show is its own economic engine. When Kendrick Lamar performed at Super Bowl 59, his streaming and download numbers exploded. The same thing happened with Usher in 2004, a 500% increase in downloads, and Rihanna in 2002-03, a 390% increase. Bad Bunny's Super Bowl 60 performance averaged over 128 million viewers, breaking the all-time halftime show record. Apple Music, which has exclusive production and promotion rights for the halftime show, pays about $50 million annually for that privilege. And here's a fun economic fact. Research has shown that a city whose team wins the Super Bowl sees a roughly $140 increase in real per capita personal income. It's the so-called feel-good effect. People spend more when their team wins. Local businesses see increased foot traffic. People go out to celebrate. So the Super Bowl isn't just a game. It's not just a betting event. It's a full-spectrum economic phenomenon that touches virtually every sector of the American economy. Food and beverage, hospitality, transportation, media, technology, advertising, retail, and of course financial services in the form of gambling. The question isn't whether the Super Bowl moves money. It clearly does. The question is, who does that money ultimately flow to? And the answer, increasingly, is not to you. All right, let's wrap this up by looking forward, because the trends I've described in this video aren't slowing down, they're accelerating. And the future of sports betting in America is going to get a lot weirder before it gets more regulated. But first, we need to address the elephant that's been lurking behind every section of this video: the integrity of the sports themselves. When billions of dollars are wagered on the outcome of sporting events, and increasingly on the individual performance of specific players within those events, the incentive to corrupt the game becomes overwhelming. This isn't theoretical. It's already happening. In 2025, gambling scandals across professional and college sports went mainstream. Multiple athletes and team personnel were punished for violating betting rules. NBA player Jonte Porter was banned for life after an investigation revealed he shared confidential information with bettors and took deliberate actions to influence prop bet outcomes on his own performance, specifically exiting games early so that underbets on his statistics would cash. In the NFL, several players have been suspended for placing bets on games. In college sports, where athletes are younger, less wealthy, and more vulnerable, the problem is even more acute. The NCAA reported that 58% of 18 to 22-year-olds are involved in at least one sports betting activity. These are the same people who are playing the games. Think about the perverse incentive structure. A college quarterback earns nothing from playing, or maybe earns some money through NIL deals. Meanwhile, sportsbooks are offering markets on his individual performance. How many yards he'll throw, how many touchdowns, how many interceptions. If someone approaches that quarterback and offers him $10,000 to throw one extra interception, not to lose the game necessarily, just to go over his interception prop, the temptation is real. The bet is tiny in the context of the broader market. The detection is difficult, and the payoff is life-changing for a college kid. Michael Lewis predicted at the Fortune panel before Super Bowl 60 that gambling scandals in college sports would keep happening until prop betting on college sports was banned entirely. The NCAA's president, Charlie Baker, has echoed this, calling on state gambling commissions to eliminate high-risk prop bets on college athletes. But here's the problem. Prop bets are enormously profitable for sportsbooks. Remember, 50 to 60% of Super Bowl wagering is on props. The percentage is similar for regular season games. Eliminating prop bets on college sports would cost the industry billions. So we have an unstoppable force: the economic incentive to offer ever more granular betting markets, meeting an immovable object, the moral imperative to protect the integrity of competition. Something has to break. And it's not just direct corruption. The mere presence of massive betting markets changes how sports are consumed and how athletes are treated. When a kicker misses a field goal that would have covered the spread, he gets death threats on social media. When a basketball player has a quiet game and prop bettors lose money, they harass him online. When a referee makes a controversial call that affects the point spread, conspiracy theories explode across betting forums and social media. The NFL acknowledged this problem by banning prediction market ads from the Super Bowl broadcast, while simultaneously maintaining official partnerships with traditional sportsbooks. The league is trying to thread an impossible needle, maximizing the gambling-driven engagement that boosts ratings while minimizing the gambling-related toxicity that threatens the product. It's worth noting that European soccer has been dealing with these issues for much longer. Gambling sponsorships on club jerseys, match-fixing scandals, organized crime infiltrating lower leagues. These are all well-documented consequences of deep gambling integration with sport. The US is following the same path, but at a much faster speed and much larger scale. What took European football decades to develop is happening in American sports in years, because the technology makes it possible to bet on anything, anywhere, instantly. The question for the sports themselves is existential. If fans believe the games might be influenced by betting interests, the product loses its authenticity. And authenticity is the only thing that separates sports from scripted entertainment. If you can't trust that the players are trying their hardest and the outcomes are genuine, why watch at all? That's the paradox the gambling industry refuses to acknowledge. The more deeply sports and gambling become intertwined, the more the industry risks destroying the very product that drives its revenue. Okay, so if I were the betting czar of America, which ironically is exactly the kind of thing Kalshi would offer a market on, what would I actually do to fix this mess? Here are 6 concrete policy proposals that economists, public health experts, and responsible gambling advocates have put forward. 1. Federal minimum standards. The current patchwork of state regulations makes no sense. A 21-year-old in New Jersey faces different rules than one in Iowa. Federal minimum standards for age limits, advertising restrictions, and responsible gambling features 2. Ban props on college sports. Period. The integrity risk is too high, the athletes are too young and too vulnerable, and the societal cost isn't worth the revenue. 3. Mandatory addiction funding. Require all sportsbooks and prediction markets to dedicate a minimum percentage of revenue, not profits, revenue, to problem gambling treatment and prevention. The current voluntary approach is laughably inadequate. 4. Advertising restrictions. Limit gambling advertising during live sports broadcasts, especially during events with large youth audiences. Ban celebrity endorsements by active athletes. Prohibit targeting algorithms from directing ads to users identified as at risk. 5. Resolve the prediction market question. Either bring prediction markets under state gambling regulation or create a clear federal framework that includes consumer protections. The current limbo, where Kalshi claims it's not gambling while offering what looks, smells, and tastes exactly like gambling, is untenable. 6. Fix the tax code. The phantom income problem created by limiting gambling loss deductions is absurd and disproportionately harms small bettors. At minimum, restore full deductibility of gambling losses against winnings. Will any of this happen? Honestly, probably not soon enough. The gambling industry spent enormous sums on lobbying in 24 and 25. Both major political parties have shown appetite for gambling revenue. The CFTC under the current administration has signaled it's not going to crack down on prediction markets. The most likely near-term development is a Supreme Court case that either confirms or denies state authority over prediction markets. Beyond that, it will probably take a major scandal, a college point shaving ring, a prediction market insider trading catastrophe, or a high-profile gambling-related tragedy to generate enough political momentum for meaningful federal action. In the meantime, the money will keep flowing. The apps will keep downloading, the parlays will keep losing, and the industry will keep growing. Now, back to those 6 big trends shaping the future. Trend number 1. The prediction market Supreme Court case. The clash between state gambling regulations and federally regulated prediction markets is almost certainly heading to the Supreme Court. Massachusetts, Nevada, and potentially California will pursue their cases up the federal appellate chain. If the court rules that CFTC regulation preempts state gambling laws, it would effectively legalize sports betting in the form of prediction market contracts in all 50 states, regardless of state law. This would be the most significant expansion of gambling access since the Murphy decision, and it would happen through a regulatory loophole rather than democratic legislation. California voters rejected sports betting. Texas hasn't legalized it, but their residents might be able to bet on the Super Bowl through Kalshi anyway. Trend number 2. AI-powered gambling. This is the one that keeps addiction researchers up at night. Artificial intelligence is being deployed by sportsbooks to optimize every aspect of the betting experience. AI can fine-tune odds in real time to maximize hold. It can identify which users are most prone to making impulsive, high-value bets and target them with personalized promotions at their most vulnerable moments. David Sasaki, a tech policy expert at the American Institute for Boys and Men, calls it the gamblification of the financial life of young men. He warns that AI will figure out when users are most likely to place bigger or riskier bets, pinpoint who's prone to making bad decisions, and target them with ads at their most psychologically vulnerable. We're entering an era where the house doesn't just have better odds, it has better intelligence. Trend number 3. The merging of finance and gambling. Kalshi's integration with Robinhood is perhaps the most symbolically important development in this entire story. Robinhood, the app that democratized stock trading and was at the center of the GameStop saga, now pipes Kalshi's prediction markets directly into its platform. This means millions of Americans, many of them young, many of them already flirting with meme stocks and crypto speculation, can now seamlessly move between buying stocks, trading options, and betting on football games within the same app ecosystem. The line between investing and gambling is disappearing. And that's not an accident, it's a business model. Trend number 4. The college sports time bomb. The NCAA's president has been sounding the alarm about prop betting on college sports. Multiple college athletes have already been caught up in gambling-related investigations. Michael Lewis predicted at a Fortune panel that gambling scandals in college sports would keep happening until prop betting on college sports was banned. The problem is structural. College athletes are unpaid or newly paid through NIL deals that are themselves a regulatory mess. They're young. They're surrounded by peers who are betting on their performances. And the sportsbooks are offering markets on their individual stats. How many points a college basketball player will score, how many yards a college quarterback will throw. It's a matter of when, not if, a major college sports betting scandal erupts that forces congressional action. Trend number 5. The international expansion. Kalshi has already expanded to over 140 countries. The global prediction market is going to dwarf the US market within a decade. And as American-style sports betting goes global, fueled by streaming, smartphones, and the erosion of traditional cultural barriers to gambling, the economic and social consequences will multiply. And finally, trend number 6. The regulatory reckoning. Something has to give. The current regulatory framework is a contradictory mess. State-regulated sportsbooks compete with federally regulated prediction markets. Different states have different rules, different tax rates, different age limits. Some states have 21 as the minimum age, while Kalshi, operating under federal regulation, allows users as young as 18. The gambling industry is spending enormous sums on lobbying to keep this fragmented landscape because fragmentation benefits incumbents. But the public health data is mounting. The political backlash, exemplified by Ohio's governor calling sports betting legalization his biggest mistake, is building. And the prediction market legal battles will force courts and eventually Congress to address the fundamental questions that everyone has been avoiding. Is betting on a football game a financial transaction or a gambling wager? Should the federal government or the states regulate it? And how do you balance the freedom of adults to gamble with the devastating reality that millions of those adults are destroying their lives in the process? So here's the final question. Stonks Forum. After everything I've laid out in this video, the $150 billion market, the Supreme Court decision, the FanDuel, DraftKings duopoly, the Kalshi disruption, the Cardi B fiasco, the addiction crisis, the phantom income tax trap, the stadium grift, the integrity crisis, and the policy vacuum, after all of it, who actually wins? Let me give you the honest, detailed, unflinching answer. The NFL wins. They generate billions from media rights, sponsorships, and advertising deals fueled by gambling engagement. Gambling makes people watch more games, watch longer, and care about games they otherwise wouldn't care about. A meaningless Week 14 game between two losing teams becomes must-watch television when you have a parlay riding on it. The league publicly kept its distance from gambling for decades while secretly benefiting from the betting interest that drove viewership. Now they've fully embraced it, signing official partnerships with DraftKings, FanDuel, and Caesars, worth hundreds of millions. Commissioner Roger Goodell once called gambling a threat to the integrity of the game. Now the league's revenue model is inextricably linked to it. The sportsbook operators win. FanDuel and DraftKings are generating billions in revenue and finally approaching sustainable profitability. Flutter Entertainment and DraftKings combined have a market capitalization exceeding $50 billion. They've built a duopoly that's nearly impossible to break, with 66% market share and growing. Even their competitors, BetMGM, Caesars, ESPN Bet, are really just fighting for scraps while the two leaders consolidate their dominance. Kalshi and the prediction market operators win. $11 billion valuation, $1 billion raised in a single funding round, backed by the most prestigious venture capital firms in the world: Sequoia, Andreessen Horowitz, Paradigm, Capital G, ARK Invest. Revenue growing at quadruple-digit percentages, over $1 billion processed on a single Sunday. Whether or not the legal battles go their way, they've already changed the industry forever. Even if prediction markets get regulated more strictly, the genie is out of the bottle. The states win, sort of. New York alone generated over $1 billion in tax revenue from sports betting in 2005. Across all states, gambling tax revenue is in the multiple billions annually. Politicians love cutting ribbons on new revenue streams. But those dollars come with social costs: increased bankruptcy rates, increased addiction, increased calls to helplines, increased strain on social services. That don't show up in the press releases. Wall Street wins. The investment banks, hedge funds, and venture capitalists who funded the sports betting explosion are making enormous returns. Flutter's stock has performed well. DraftKings went from a SPAC merger to a multi-billion-dollar public company. The prediction market boom is creating a new asset class that generates fees, trading commissions, and data that can be monetized in ways we haven't even imagined yet. Sequoia's investment in Kalshi has already multiplied many times over, at least on paper. The media wins, temporarily. ESPN, Fox, CBS, they all benefit from gambling-driven viewership increases and direct partnership revenue. ESPN Bet was supposed to be a billion-dollar business for Disney. It hasn't worked out as planned, but the broader dynamic, gambling makes sports more engaging, which drives ratings, which drives advertising revenue, benefits every media company that covers sports. And who loses? This is the most important point in the entire video. The math is unforgiving. With hold rates averaging 9 to 20% depending on bet type, the vast majority of sports bettors will lose money over time. This isn't an opinion. It's arithmetic. The 4.2 million Americans with gambling disorders lose the most, but even casual bettors are statistically destined to come out behind over any meaningful time horizon. Every single person watching this video who bets on sports will, on average, lose money. That's what the hold rate means. Young men lose. They're the primary target demographic, the most likely to develop gambling problems, the most likely to believe they can beat the house, and the least likely to have the financial cushion to absorb losses. They're funding the industry's growth with their credit card debt, their depleted savings accounts, and their borrowed money. They're not the customer, they're the product. Families lose. Behind every gambling addiction statistic is a family dealing with hidden debt, broken trust, emotional volatility, and in the worst cases, domestic violence and suicide. 1 in 5 people with gambling disorder attempt or complete suicide. That's real people, real families, real tragedies. Host cities lose, or, at best, break even. The economic impact numbers are inflated by studies funded by the people who benefit from those numbers. The costs are real and often hidden. The stadiums are publicly funded with money that could go to schools, hospitals, and infrastructure. The NFL captures most of the value and moves on to the next city. And American society loses. The normalization of constant, frictionless, algorithmically optimized gambling is a social experiment we're running without informed consent. We legalized it state by state with minimal public health infrastructure. We allowed Silicon Valley venture capitalists to fund platforms that bypass state regulations entirely. We let the gambling industry spend billions on advertising while funding problem gambling treatment at a tiny fraction of that level. We created a tax system that penalizes people for losing money on gambling, and we did all of this in less than 8 years. A blink of an eye in the history of public policy. Look, I'm a finance guy. This channel is about following the money and understanding economic systems. And from a pure market perspective, the American sports betting industry is a masterclass in value creation. It's a $150 billion market that didn't exist 8 years ago. It's created jobs, generated tax revenue, funded innovation, and given consumers a product they clearly want. But economic value creation and social welfare aren't always the same thing. The opioid industry created economic value too. The subprime mortgage market created economic value, right until it didn't. The question isn't whether the sports betting industry is successful. It clearly is. The question is, at what cost? And who's paying? I'm not going to tell you not to bet on the Super Bowl. I'm not your dad. But I am going to tell you this. Understand the game you're playing. The sportsbooks, the prediction markets, the NFL, they're all playing a longer, smarter, better funded game than you are. The house always wins. It's not a cliche, it's a mathematical fact. If you got something out of this video, do me a favor, share it with someone who needs to see these numbers. Subscribe to Stonk's Forum if you haven't already. Drop a comment below telling me, did you bet on the Super Bowl? How much? And be honest, did you win or lose? I'm betting most of you lost. And that's exactly how the system is designed. This has been Stonk's Forum. The game is rigged. The question is whether you keep playing. See you in the next one.